I think one of the challenges people have is that they have a lot of stuff on their to-do list, but most of the stuff on their to-do list is do-do, not really stuff they should do. Validation is for parking tickets, right? That's it. When you go to eat, you want to get validation for your parking ticket. And other than that, if you think you've got a good idea, if you think you got a good path,
I love it.
smart. Like, if people ask me, Greg, why are you successful? I'd say it's because I got balls the size of this room. Not to sound stupid, but I do, you know? I see opportunities, and
Yeah.
I'm not afraid to pounce on them.
I had the pleasure of interviewing someone that founded and built a company called Proforma. He invested $200 with one location and built it to 700 locations, each doing around $1 million in revenues. Yeah. Greg Muzzillo is one of the most giving back people that I've met over the years. Even as a potential client, when I was in my 20s, having people constantly slamming the door on me, Greg was always so kind and took a moment to give me some advice and a positive nudge in the right direction. He gives much of his success to his lovely wife, Vera, who is the CEO of the company and is the driver that took it from 40 million to where it is now. We spoke about how important it is to have the cajones to take things to the next level in your life and in your business, along with spiritual and hilarious advice that only Greg can do. Welcome, everybody, to the Goliath Show.
Thanks for having me, David.
It's great to have you here. So let's just get right into it. We're going to talk a little bit about you. You are the CEO and founder of Proforma.
I'm just the founder now. My wife is the CEO. So.
Tell us a little bit about Proforma.
Sure, and I'm happy to even talk a little bit about like why I started it, if you'd like.
Yep.
Yeah,
That would be wonderful.
because I think most folks listening who might be earlier stage or wanting to be entrepreneurs would like the story. Anyhow, I studied accounting when I was in college, and I love studying accounting. However, when I graduated, I realized I hated doing it. And it ended up that a buddy of mine, a fraternity brother from college, and somebody that I got an apartment with after we graduated, we would go out on Friday nights looking for dates for Saturday night, and he was telling me about what he was doing. And he was a salesperson for a distributor of printing and promotional products. The more I'd start to understand what he did. And when you study accounting, you don't understand, you don't learn about distribution because you learn about manufacturing. And I had a bias that everybody made what they sold, but in listening to him, I realized no, many companies are distributors, and we, Proforma, are today a distributor. And he was anyhow telling me about orders for $50,000 orders with $20,000 in profit, and $80,000 orders with $35,000 in profit. And I thought, good night. Within a few months of graduating and hanging out like that, I said to him, listen, you know sales and you know this business. I know accounting. Let's do this. And we each put in $100, bought a phone answering machine and some business cards. That was in 1978, and started the company. And so that's kind of a backdrop of why I started the business. And it's a very easy business to start because the distributor, we didn't need to have any manufacturing equipment, manufacturing real estate, manufacturing employees, manufacturing inventory. We just needed to go out, knock on doors, and get some customers. So that's the backdrop. Proforma today is a franchise distributor network of B2B type businesses. We're not retail, although a few of our people do have showrooms. But we're a franchise distribution network of printing and promotional products, sales approaching 700 million, and our average distributor sales are well over $1 million.
Your business, with the marketing side of things, you handle advertising and promotional products?
Yeah, mostly the tangible products, commercial printing, being brochures, direct mail, business cards, letterhead, envelopes, signs, banners, displays.
Okay. So how did you get the business started to get to the next level? What did that look like?
Well, it looked like a lot of fear because, right, I studied hard for 4 years to get this job with a big ACPA firm, and within a few months I quit. My mother even accused me of being nuts and having lost my mind. And so I had no choice. I thought this sounded like a great business, sounded very doable. Think about it. Every business buys some of what we sell. They run out and have to order more. So anyhow, my partner actually started the business. I bought him out decades ago, but he started the business while we worked off of my income from the CPA firm. We took some business cards and we went up and down the street. We knocked on doors, and my former partner showed me how to introduce myself, asked for the person that bought the printing and promotional products. And back in those days, it was a lot different, right? And you could see people, or people would, the receptionist would tell you who the decision maker was. And so you just gather up some information, meet with the people. And I worked hard because I think probably fear is the best motivator. And I was afraid of failure. And I think a lot of people thought I would fail and thought I was foolish leaving this great career for this small little distributorship.
So tell me about the transition to get into franchising. What made you want to do that?
Yeah. So great question. So we were growing nicely. We started in 1978. By the mid-'80s, we were doing several millions of dollars a year. We had made the Inc. magazine. They publish a list of, back then it was only 500 companies, the Inc. magazine, 500 fastest growing companies. And we made that list 3 years in a row. Now it's 5,000 actually, and usually 20 or more of our franchise owners make that list every year. But anyhow, we had made that list. And also I had an experience where we were in Cleveland, Ohio. That's where I grew up. It's where I started the company. But we had an experience where we wanted to expand to Columbus, Ohio. And that would be our first office opening up outside of Cleveland. And so we advertised for salespeople in Columbus. We found some candidates. We interviewed them. We went back down and narrowed down the field. And then finally we went down to Columbus, Ohio, to make an offer to this great young man that we were very excited about hiring to be our first regional office manager. And when we got to meet with him, he said to us, he said, you know, guys, you're really great guys, and I've thought about this a lot, but what I really want to do is I want to be like you guys, and I want to own my own business, so I don't want to take this job. So at first I was heartbroken, right? Because that felt like failure. But I thought, this guy's maybe like us. This guy may also want to own his own business. In fact, he told us he did. And I thought to myself, how could we have leveraged what infrastructure we had to help him achieve his goal of owning his own business instead of being a salesperson for us? And that haunted me for a while. I thought about it for a long time, and within about a year I came up with the idea of franchising the company, and that's really what was born out of. And it helped that we had had some publicity in Inc. magazine 3 years in a row. There was also an article about us in Success magazine, so we had some great publicity. But that failure to be able to hire that first person we wanted, because he wanted to own his own business, gave me the idea to think, how could we help other people that want to own their own business succeed in this really great business? So that's where it all started from, and that was at the end of 1985 and the beginning of 1986 that we started franchising.
Great. Okay. That's a great story. So something that starts off as being a negative, or if you think is a failure, ends up being the whole transition of what created this amazing company.
Well, it sure was the seedling for it. Lots of watering and lots of other fertilizer helped us to get to where we are today. But that was the beginning. And as you know, David, because of your success, it all has to start with a beginning.
Yes, it does. That's amazing. And speaking of seeds and speaking of starting out and such, I read that you have 10 children?
10 children and 11 grandchildren.
Wow. So I see a common problem with this. I mean, there's different things. People call it founder syndrome, and there's all this ego that goes into that when you're a founder and building a business. And we deserve to have the successes we have, but we also sometimes run people over, and we have all these different issues. But one of the big issues I see is family in business. Is there any advice that you can give to these up and comers that are doing family and business, family and friends, I guess you could say?
Well, we're blessed that the children of ours that are in the business are very smart and very talented. And I think that Vera and I, as a husband and wife team, she's been CEO, I think, for over 20 years now. And she's way smarter than I am. Vera was one of the first women to go to the University of Notre Dame. And she truly is. I'm not just saying that because she could fire me. She is very smart. Like, if people ask me, Greg, why are you successful? I'd say it's because I got balls the size of this room. Not to sound stupid, but I see opportunities and I'm afraid to pounce on them. And I think that's a skill set in and of itself. But at some point, the company gets to where it needs systems and organization. And I am neither systematic nor organized. And so she brings that wonderful skill set and is clearly, I believe, over the last 20 years, the biggest part really of taking the company from where it was to where we are today.
Wow. Amazing. Okay. Since Goliath is talking about, I named it that way because there's adversities that we have to overcome in our lives. And a lot of people will have adversities and then stop. And people will have adversities and they'll keep going. And people have adversities their entire lives. So I wanted to talk to you about what have been some of the Goliaths in your life that you've had to overcome to reach this level of success.
Sure, we were way undercapitalized. $200 probably is not adequate capitalization for starting a business that pretty quickly accelerated into the $1 million and multi-million-dollar stratosphere. Fortunately, as a distributor, we were able to, we sent an order to the probably more than 1,000 different manufacturers we represent. We send them the order. They make the stuff. In general, they ship it to our customers in our name. We bill the customer, the supplier bills us, and basically that lag between when the customer paid us and we paid the supplier really helped finance the business. So, I mean, in all candor, we were very undercapitalized, but our suppliers were sort of unwittingly and probably unwillingly helping us to capitalize the business. So that was probably the first challenge. Another challenge was we were the first people to franchise in this business, and there was a trade association, I won't mention the name of them, that really didn't like the idea of our franchising. And I think that the president, that would be the person that ran this trade association, he's no longer running. I think he got that if businesses like us were successful in franchising, we wouldn't need a trade association. We'd almost, at least in the industry, of course I love the International Franchise Association, but to a degree he was right that why would we need their trade association when we almost would become our own trade association? So in 1986, when we started franchising, he called me up, and I don't think our industry needs franchising, but you sound really clever, and we could really use you on the board of directors of our trade association. And I said to him, well, how much does that pay? And he said, it doesn't pay anything. It's volunteer. And then I said to him, well, we're going to be franchising. And he tried to get some of our suppliers to want to not do business with us. That's how challenged he was by our franchising. And that created a lot of sleepless nights because we sell a lot of printing and promotional products, but I don't know how to print any of them, right? So he was threatening our supply chain. That was very challenging. And then in the early 90s, it was time to buy out my partner. And for everybody listening that thinks someday they want to start a business, there's probably come a day. Most people like to start a business with a partner because there's comfort in a crowd, if you will. And sometimes, like my former partner and I, he sort of had the idea of the business, and then I had the idea of franchising. But anyhow, things got to the point where I felt he was no longer carrying his weight. In fact, he was by far not carrying his weight. But even worse, and so now we had been franchising for 6 or 7 years, even worse, his wife would complain, why is Greg the president? Why is Greg the one giving the speeches at our convention? Wah, wah, wah. And I thought I had enough. Not only is he not, in my opinion, not carrying his weight, but now here his wife is thankless, thoughtless, and unappreciative of what it was that I was doing. And I thought I just had enough. And I went into his office and I told him, listen, either you buy me out or I'm buying you out, but we need to go our separate ways. And he chose for me to buy him out. But anyhow, that was the first challenge. Is I would advise anybody that's listening, have a buy-sell agreement in your partnership, right, David? But worse, so I struck an agreement with him to buy out the business, but the bank didn't like the way I was buying out the business with their money, because we basically had an asset-based loan, meaning it was financed by primarily receivables, the only asset in our business, and they didn't like that I was using an asset-based loan in part to fund the buyout. And so they threatened to introduce me to a part of banking, David, you don't learn about when you're in college, and that's called the workout department, right? That's not, the workout department's not those nice, friendly people on the bank billboard. We want your business. We love small business. No. The workout department are the people who are fierce as pit bulls, and their job is to get their money back no matter what. And so they advised that maybe I go find an investor. And I had become friends with Fred DeLuca, the guy that started Subway. He passed 9 or 10 years ago now. But we were on the board of directors of the International Franchise Association. And when we would hang out after board meetings, he would ask if I was interested in having an investor. And I wasn't, although I was flattered, because obviously he's a bright, very bright person. But anyhow, when the bank said I needed to go find an investor, that's the first person I thought of. And I called him up and said, hey, Fred, remember when you used to talk about maybe wanting an investor? I said, I told him the situation, and he ended up making an investment. And sadly, though, he passed several years ago. But that was very trying time. So lack of capitalization and adequate capital, and then doing something that was outside really, and I wasn't going to go read the bank note or anything. That's not who I am. And so, lack of capitalization was a huge challenge that threatened to almost put us out of business if the bank would have called that loan at that particular time. So a lot of sleepless nights, David. You know what that's like. A lot of sleepless nights.
Definitely. Well, so you talked about overcoming the beginning where you undercapitalized. I'll start with that first, and we'll get to the partnership thing. So I'm being undercapitalized, probably the most common issue with most of the people. Being in private equity and having thousands of pitches given to me over the years, that is the biggest issue that I saw anyways, was being undercapitalized. The one common thing I saw, though, was that there wasn't a lot of work to get it going, meaning they were pre-sales. They had ideas, but they really weren't doing the selling, right? It's like a Shark Tank, right? Mark Cuban comes out and says the number one salesperson in the company has to be the CEO. That's how you build a business. So as long as the CEO is the best salesperson, that's how the company's going to succeed. To get to that point, I think people need to invest. Entrepreneurs that are growing their businesses, they need to bring enough to the table to see that growth, that momentum going, so that investors are more interested in doing that, right?
Yeah, I'm involved in entrepreneurship at lots of primarily colleges and university. Notre Dame, Case Western Reserve University, Baldwin Wallace, nobody ever heard of it, but that's the college I went to. But anyhow, a lot of times these kids are showing up with these plans. I think it's almost unfortunate in that they're teaching these kids today in school almost through these pitch competitions that you got to go raise money from day one. And I'm not sure that, they're not teaching these kids in schools about bootstrapping. Now, I just told you bootstrapping almost put us out of business, but the good news is that I owned 100% of the company, and I hadn't sliced up the pie even before we started it. And some of these kids, they've got some pretty good ideas. They've got some interesting ideas, but I think some of these plans are very unrealistic in that they want to get rich before they even have a dollar in sales. They want to get paid, and they have really silly valuations, and you see that on Shark Tank, and you see that, David, I'm sure you see that with some of the plans that you see. They just have unrealistic expectations of the valuation of the business and how much they should be willing to make from day one. And when I look at a plan, if somebody's not willing to eat peanut butter and jelly like I was for a little while, then I just think that fire in the belly, that fear in the mind is a great motivator to get going and growing.
Okay. And then to go on the partnership side, what advice would you give? Because that is a big issue. A lot of times when you become partners, one of the partners I went into business with, he said, David, in 5 years, we're probably not going to like each other. The chances are we're not going to like each other. And I was like,
was he right?
Yeah, it wasn't that I didn't like him. I didn't want to do business with him. It was just, It wasn't so much personal. It was more the business side. Right. And I think that finding that balance is important, but this is a great question for the listeners. What is the best thing to focus on the partnership buyout? Like when I do a partnership buyout, this is how I do it. Is there any type of advice you could give?
Yeah, go see a lawyer. From day one, get a lawyer. And even though you might think you can't afford it, get a great lawyer that's going to talk you through who owns how much of a percentage, who's responsible for what percentage, because sometimes investors might not also equally share in responsibility to do the work. So there's no one answer to a great question. I think the right answer is go get a lawyer, talk through roles, responsibilities, equity, and what are some of the suggested buy-sell arrangements that they might recommend that you put in the agreement from the beginning.
Right. I think the common question I have is that they have a hard time figuring out what is the number line on the financials that make it make sense, and how do you calculate that. So, and it's a common issue, in business today, because you both have to come to an agreement on something, and it's easier if you do it from the beginning, obviously. Are there any other Goliaths that you had to overcome in your life that you've really had to grow from?
Of course. I think sometimes there are known Goliaths, known challenges. I think sometimes there are unknown challenges, like we don't know what we don't know. And I think a lot of times entrepreneurs like me, I'm a pretty self-confident person. Even if I don't know, I'll act like I know. I don't know that I believe in fake it till you make it, but man, I think if anybody ever did that, it was me, right? But I know that early on I felt I needed advice. I felt I needed mentoring. It's amazing how few people, I think, really do reach out and ask for advice. And I think it's amazing how many people, your age, David, and my age, your level of success and mine, are happy to help. Why am I doing this video? Why are you doing this video? Because, we both want to give back to the next generation, because so many people gave to us some wonderful advice. And I'll never forget, I called up the guy that owned Management Recruiters in Cleveland, Ohio. We were in Cleveland, Ohio at the time, and Management Recruiters was headquartered in Cleveland, Ohio, and they were by far the largest franchising company. And I went to, and he was very agreeable. Like, I thought, wow, that's really nice. I called up, talked to his assistant. He was very agreeable, agreed to meet me, and I met with him for an hour. And I think, in general, in most situations, people talk about getting mentored, and I think you get 90% of the juice, if you will, out of the 10% of the squeeze. Like just one meeting I had with this particular gentleman who's since passed, but Alan Schoenberg, we've talked about him. Alan Schoenberg was very nice. And we met for about an hour, and at the end of the meeting, I said, well, do you have any other advice for me? And he said, yeah, one more thing. He said, Greg, don't sell dirt. I thought, what does that mean? Don't sell dirt. And what he was saying was, don't sell territories. He had sold territories in Management Recruiters, and, very few people are wired to not know how high is up. Like, very few people are wired to just never know when enough is enough, when to really stop making money. most people at some point reach a comfort level that even though they'll say they want to make more money, they're not going to work another marginal hour for another marginal dollar of income. They're comfortable enough. And he had a number of franchise owners in that system that owned geographical territories, and it limited the growth of management recruiters because they owned those territories and there was nothing he could do in very undeveloped territories. And that's what we were going to do. When I had met with him, I thought, oh, okay, well, we'll go. Because, like, you know, when you don't have any money and you're thinking about franchising, you sell the rights to San Francisco for $10,000, right? Who knew better? So he caused us and me to go back and rethink the whole thing. And we came up with a system that doesn't have territories, which really at the end of the day is really more about limitations than it is protection. Because in my business, if somebody is in Cleveland, Ohio, and they own the rights to Cleveland, Ohio, and they have their best customer gets moved to Chicago, but they don't have the rights to sell in that territory, they lose the ability to call on that great relationship in Chicago. And so there's more limitations that come with territories than opportunities. Anyhow, I would say that piece of advice probably increased the value and success of Proforma at least 20x to maybe much more than that as a multiple of our success. One sentence, one thought I never thought of, and that could have been the biggest Goliath of all, would have been having a horrible structure that would have limited our growth. And so the best advice I would share with people is reach out. Reach out to successful people. You'd be amazed how willing most people are who have reached some modicum of success to give back and to help, because you don't know what you don't know about the business you're thinking about starting and growing.
That is amazing piece of advice right there. So if you had a time machine and, you know, you had an opportunity to go back in time, is there anything that you would have changed?
You know, that's a great question. The answer is definitely no, because I don't know what those changes may have done to the trajectory of our company. I surely made some mistakes, but I learned from those mistakes. And I think sometimes those learnings are just as valuable as learning from the things that we have done right. Yeah, there's been some pain, but undoing that pain undoes the learning. And if you undo the learning, you're probably more than likely bound to repeat the mistake anyhow. So, you know, very blessed that where we are today, like I said, 650 going on $700 million in sales. And yeah, I can't think of anything that was so horrific that I would undo it.
I was so focused on the business and I was working so hard to build an empire that I lacked in the family department. I thought I was a great father and husband, but I think as time went on, I started realizing I wasn't spending enough time because I was just trying to build this empire for my family, thinking that it was for my family and stuff like that. So how did you find work-life balance?
You know, I'm not sure there's balance. I think there's imbalance, and I think when it's time to work like a machine, and when it's time to be with the family, be with the family. And that's probably where I struggled the most. I made it to many of my children's important events, their plays and their sporting events and their other school events, etc. I was coaches on many of their different teams. I struggled sometimes not with being in attendance, but I would say with being present. Meaning, I was there, but dadgummit, some of the challenges and some of the problems weighed very heavily on me, and I'm not sure I was 100% present. Now, my kids knew I was there. That's really important. I don't know that they knew the fire that was going on in my head, and I'm not sure how to calm that. I read a lot of those books about everything's going to be okay, blah, 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 whatever, etc. But that's not a very difficult thing to get through a young man's head when he realizes that if certain things don't go the right way, I could have lost the house I was raising my children in, had to yank my kids out of the schools they were going to. I mean, some pretty drastic kind of things that could have been consequences. So I would say try as hard as possible. And maybe that's something I would do different, come to think of it. When you're at work, do the work. When you're at home, do the home stuff. Be present. because I know I could have enjoyed some of those moments for my children more than I was able to, because I was just trying to achieve so much, really, for them, right? I wanted them to have the things and the opportunities I never had. But being present is more important than just being there. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. I love that. That was the word that was used in my life, was present. Be present. So I'm glad you brought that up, because that's really important. And it's something that I want to bring to the listeners too, to find. I understand what you mean by balance too, but you kind of have to have some level of plan, where you say from this time to this time, I'm with my family. I had to do that to change my mind, because I was always working in my mind, and there was just so much going on, and people were constantly freaking out. And at one point, Greg, I had 9 presidents reporting to me, and It was from the ages of, they were 45 to 65-year-olds, men and women, and I got to tell you, it was like herding cats. It was so much work, and it was just too much. And that's a whole nother podcast of having too many people reporting to you. But somebody asked me the other day, what's the sexiest thing that you like when you have someone coming to work for you? What's the biggest trait that you love, that you're like, and I blurted out, and I just said, someone who's resourceful, someone who takes what you give them and figures out a way to make it work. And when I talk to you about these presidents, sometimes it was like I felt like I was dealing with a teenager or a child, because it was like, can't you figure that out with your 35 years of experience? Well, it's almost like they were looking for guidance from a 35, 36-year-old kid. Back then I was 30, I was younger. And I always said, well, what's the problem and what's your solution? I'm not interested in the problems. I'm interested in the solutions. And the resourcefulness of someone that could just get things done and just find a way. I was amazed, Greg, of the individuals with the least amount of experience sometimes were actually my favorite employees, my favorite team members, because they were willing to do whatever it took. And they learned and they grew. And I would teach my team about cross and their abilities. So they would cross train. So learn other people's jobs and helping them to do that and such. It's a really important thing. Okay. So is there anything that you would like to share with the younger generation up and coming? I don't even care if they're younger, just someone who is getting into business and starting something new.
Sure. I learned pretty early on that all time isn't created equal. Meaning, if you want, and I teach our folks, and I teach in the industry we're in, there's no excuse for not making $500,000 a year. Like, it's a no-brainer to make $500,000 a year in our business, and yet very few people do. I think one of the challenges people have is that they have a lot of stuff on their to-do list, but most of the stuff on their to-do list is do-do, not really stuff they should do. Most of the stuff on their to-do list is going to make them crazy before it makes them wealthy. And so in our business, and in every business, David, there are those nuggets of things that are the $500 an hour work, that if you do them, you'll get wealthy. But then there's probably, for every one thing that'll make you crazy, that you could delegate or you could outsource. One of the challenges, I think, for a lot of business owners is that they're control freaks. Part of the reason they start their own business. And so it's very difficult many times for them to delegate. But if they don't, they'll get stuck in the muck and they'll never achieve the right level of wealth. And so we actually even have a form at Proforma for our folks that breaks out on their to-do list, on their calendar, is what I'm doing $500 an hour work, or is it $25 an hour work? So that they need to think that through. I think that is a huge issue even from day one. I remember another thing. I remember when I wanted to start franchising, we joined the International Franchise Association. Well, it doesn't take long for some lawyer to show up at one of those conferences and tell you everything that could go wrong. And you could be subject to all these lawsuits. And it started to scare me so much, I thought, dang, I don't know if I want a franchise. And I'll never forget, it was Andy Kostecka. Andy was I don't think the government is as involved as they used to be, but there was like a Chamber of Commerce person, and I sat down with Andy and I said, this stuff's really starting to scare me, even though I knew that we had a great business, a great franchisable business, and a great franchising model that we've developed. I hadn't yet pulled the trigger. And he said, Greg, stop worrying about all those things. In fact, he was talking about if you thought about everything that could go wrong when you pull out of your driveway, from the moment you pull out of your driveway to the time you drive to your office to the time you park your car, if you just thought about everything that could go wrong just on that little journey, you'd never go to work again. He said, just start franchising. And I think that's, as trite as that sounds from Nike, like to just do it, at some point, just shut up and do it.
Great advice. My twin sister was my general counsel for 17 years, so I know exactly what you're talking about. We're polar opposites in every way you can think. And having that advice was helpful, and she protected me a lot in my life from bad people. And but her job was to be a naysayer. Of lawyers have a tendency to kind of cramp our style as entrepreneurs, and thank you for that input, and I will take that in consideration, and then I would go. She always knew that was the way I was going to handle it, because sometimes I did. But what if I took all of her advice? I would have never done it, because I had no idea what I was doing, Greg. I still don't. But that's besides the point. Some of the problems with founders that I'm trying to help them deal with, it's literally the biggest reason I started this, I guess, single issue, was helping founders to get past themselves and to help them to see things. And by watching Greg and others that have done it, it will help them to understand, oh, he went through this, and I need to stop doing that, and I need to be careful. And I watched someone with this legal issue, by the way, who was a good friend of mine who started an investment firm, and he listened to every single thing his lawyer said. And I told him in a meeting once, I said, he was younger. He was 10, 15 years younger than myself. And I said, listen, I've been through this before. I am telling you right now, he's a wonderful guy. He's got all this experience. He has all these funding sources. So I understand why he's here, but he should not be in these meetings, because it was bringing everybody down, and we were hindering moving forward. So that's I'm glad you brought that up, because that is a big factor.
I think another key thing, and I was very fortunate. I think a lot of people don't know especially if somebody comes from a background like I did, and I think you did too, David, where I was a lower middle class kind of guy. My dad didn't even go to college. My dad said, I'll pay for you to go to high school, and you're on your own after that. I love my mom and dad. They wanted the best for me, for sure. They didn't understand me, but it's all good. But I didn't understand everything that was on the menu of life. And I think a lot of people, there's this song, I can't remember the name, but there's a line in it that said, if I hadn't seen such riches, I could settle for being poor. And I remember being pretty young, and I heard about a group called Young Presidents Organization, and I joined that. And oh, wow, did that open up my eyes to, I didn't even know people flew in private airplanes. I could barely afford to fly in an airplane, right? In a public airplane. But I got exposed to people that own multiple homes and people that flew on private jets. And I got exposed to so many things that were on the menu of life that I didn't even know existed. That it wasn't just about wanting those things. Of course, I wanted some of those things for my family, but was also just knowing what was achievable. Yeah, and if you don't know what's on the menu of life, and if you're not hanging out with the people that can inspire you and encourage you to get there, because one thing is for sure, people who have achieved more than someone else are very happy to help them achieve their same level of success, because it's not threatening. However, people who are at someone's level of success or below their level of success are very threatened by that person wanting to achieve more. And I think there's a lot of people who might be listening right now that have a next door neighbor that wouldn't be happy if you pulled in with a new Mercedes-Benz. I think it would threaten them. And a lot of people don't know that. It's all subconscious kind of calculation. But find groups where there's people that have way more than you, because they will inspire you, they will motivate you, and they'll want to help you.
Concept. That is very interesting. Very interesting. It's very interesting you said that. And I think to add to that is talking too much. Somebody said to me, a mentor of mine, David, you got to shut up.
That's all right. You know, David, I don't know that that's true. I
Well-
learn with my mouth open. I learn talking out loud.
Yeah,
I really
yeah,
do.
I do.
I wasn't a good student in school. Sit down and shut up and learn for 45 minutes is a formula for failure with me. So I think there are people who learn with their mouth open. Just make sure you're talking to the right people.
That's it right there. He said, stop talking to these people because what you're doing is you're looking for validation of some kind.
Absolutely. Validation, I wrote a blog about this. Validation is for parking tickets. You go to eat, you want to get validation for your parking ticket. And other than that, if you think you've got a good idea, if you think you got a good path,
I love it.
let's get going and growing.
Yes, do it.
But the look, 80 years of my life, I think that I probably saw the world as either those who were greater than me or those who weren't, right? Mm-hmm. And somewhere along the way, of course, I've become very spiritual. I happen to believe actually virtually everyone will be in heaven. Everyone. And we don't need to get into religion or philosophy or argue about it. I just believe everybody's going to heaven. And I'll tell you why, because I've kind of come to the point where, as a father of 10 children, I can't imagine thinking that my kid, any one of my kids, could do anything so horrible. I'd lock the door to the house, set it on fire, and make sure they burned up in it and stayed alive while that house burned for the rest of eternity. Like, I'm a father, and I can't imagine.
Yes, I agree.
So I think everybody's going to heaven, but why I share that is, when I look at people and I think, I'm going to be in heaven with them someday, however you define that, doesn't matter. It really levels the playing field. Like someday we're all going to be in heaven together. And I don't care if it's the ditch digger on the side of the road, but when I slow down and I think someday I'm going to be in heaven with that person, and I think I never want them to be grumpy with me and say, are you the one that drove crazy by me when I was on the side of the road? It really gives me a sense of levity about life when I look at everybody I work with, everybody I know, or everybody I see, including people that drive me crazy, and I think someday we're just going to be in heaven together. Just smile.
Right. That's a great point. Is there anything else that you'd like to share?
No, I think we laid some really great groundwork and some great food for thought for younger entrepreneurs thinking about starting a business or early on in that business thinking about franchising. I think you asked some really great questions. I had a lot of fun answering them, and it was great to get to know you better, great to let you get to know me better, and great to get to know your audience better.
Thank you so much for being on.